Hello, everyone. Welcome to Hooked and Booked Understanding Young Readers Across Borders. This is the first live event that we are having as part of season 2 of Literature Across Borders, a transnational exchange that's dedicated to young people's literature that Meghaa, and my wonderful co founder, Dr. Alexia Casale, we both set up at Spa University last year. Children don't read is a very common refrain, but what is it that children are really missing? Certainly not books, because there's a lot of books that are coming out. What children miss is the presence of an adult in their life who can evoke a love for reading. And today's panel, I'm so delighted to have a set of wonderful people from the space of libraries and schools that take books into the hands of young people in the US, in the UK, and obviously in India. And they're going to tell us a bit about how books make a precarious journey from when they are published to when they reach the hands of a young reader. Are there sort of reading preferences that are common across the globe? Is there sort of any common idea of what sort of writing can be called good writing for children? And many other such questions, which Lexi would be sort of discussing with everyone on the panel. Before I hand over to Lexi, a quick round of introductions to all our panelists. A proud Alaskan, Eileen Lamb is an MFA in children's literature and crafts novels in verse and prose inspired by nature and whimsical tales. She is a passionate educator, a dynamic speaker, and an animal lover. JoAnne Saldanha is a library educator. She's a consultant and a children's literature enthusiast who for more than 2 decades. She is popularly known on social media as Mithan. Sneha Sunder is the head of library for the primary years program at Neve Academy in Bangalore. Neve does a lot of work in terms of investments into children's. Sneha has previously worked as a corporate lawyer and editor, and she now enjoys advocating reading for pleasure and purpose. Finally, Laura Bridge. Laura is the library head and literacy coordinator at an all boys state secondary school in Bath, the United Kingdom. She has 20 years' experience as a primary teacher in England, in Spain, and in the Netherlands. She is an alumna of the MA Writing for Young People program at Baltimore University and holds a Master's of Education in Children's Literature from the Penn State University in the US. So that's for all the lovely people who are joining us to discuss books and children today. Just a quick sort of a note before I hand over to Lexi. For everyone who has so kindly taken out time to join us on YouTube and you're watching this, you can log into the YouTube channels and pose questions that you might have for our panelists today. We will be asking questions to them at the end of the discussion. So thank you, and Lexi, the stage is all yours.
Thank you so much, Meghaa, and thank you to everyone who's here, our wonderful, wonderful panel, and all the audience live and hopefully watching us on the recording as well. As Meghaa was saying, this project came about when we were talking about children's books and all sorts of things, and realized that there's such an issue with books traveling. Books don't travel often enough, and suddenly conversations about books are so limited across borders. And we really wanted to change that. So this came out of our joint passion for sort of getting energy behind changing all of that. And because of Meghaa's wonderful work with the Green Lit Fest in India, we started in our first 2 years doing these pairings of books on green themes. So although it's a rather specific question, in some ways, I think if we ask some broader questions later, we've already taken some things off the board. It'll be easier to have a discussion about those broader themes. So going in from that angle, about our first 2 years are about green themed books. Though in our third year, I'm delighted to say we'll be branching out and looking at other sort of human rights issues in kids' books. But for now, would it be be possible to hear from each of you in turn? Maybe if we start with Eileen, and then we go to JoAnne, and then we come to Laura, and then we come to Sneha, and then we can circle back round as necessary. But if we can sort of go around and talk about, what do you hear about green books from the kids you work with? Do they want books about animals? Do they not like books that have anything to do with climate change? Is it the opposite? Are there patterns about ages or stages, or dyslexic readers want to know everything about nature and the environment? I have no idea. And maybe it's different for all of us, but could I just hand over it and say, the floor is yours. Tell us about these things, if you would.
So as far as the US and the people I know, there has been an increase in environmental fiction in young adult books, like Laura Chauvin, and their names are like leaving me right now, but a lot of them are writing about climate change in a fictional way, but in a way that you can easily apply to what's going on around us. And I think kids are starting to be interested because there's a lot of conversation on the news and in local communities about the environment and how the way we've been living has impacted our everyday life. And so that is making their way into fiction. There's earthquake books and all kinds of things. And then there's even what we read in Bath, Green Rising, kind of a fantasy book that has the undertone of environmental awareness in a way that kids find interesting, and I found interesting too. As far as the younger kids, like Wild Robot, and let's see, and there's lots of animals like Sophie the Mouse, which isn't really environmental but has animals, the younger ones. And then there was one that we read, the picture book about. Do you remember what it was called? Like, see, the walnut tree. It was the book that was from the U.S. I apologize for not knowing the name, but that shows it follows the life of a tree and a little girl and a relationship to the grandmother. And so I found that really fascinating too, because even as small as kids that listen to picture books, the message is getting there. So, yeah.
So I find that, the children, we now have a lot of books in the Indian context. And to begin with, the very young children is actually having them connect with nature through the books, because it's not always that family or the adults around them are helping them connect with nature. So books that are actually helping them name what they can see around them, whether it's the trees or the animals that we have endemic to our country, are the books that seem to do really well because they can see what is around them. And as we get older, then the mysteries around books. So Deepak Dalal's series of adventure stories that are set in some of the national parks around India. Those are the books that sort of catch the attention and hold the attention of the middle grade readers. What I haven't noticed is a lot of interest in climate fiction. That is something that they don't really come and ask for. I feel that's where the adult in the library or the teacher needs to open that out, to open that awareness out, maybe by facilitating a reading and a discussion around it, and then introducing what we have available, to help them engage with those themes. So definitely, I think the children in the school that I work with connect with books that are written more in the local context. But of course, there are universal books like The Great Kapok Tree that would really, help them connect with what is happening in that story, because there's so much for them to see and participate in, and talk about, and get involved in that tale.
I think a lot of the themes that people have said already, I agree with, that the children are quite interested in the environment, but they're not particularly interested in reading about it in their novels. So I'm working with secondary school children now, but I did work in a primary school for a long time. And I would say that when, as you write, with the picture books and the younger books, kids are really, really invested in the environment when they're little. But I think it's partly because they don't understand how big a problem it is. And I think that when the children get to secondary school, they suddenly realise it's a really big problem and they can't solve it, and it becomes a bit scary for them. Part of my dissertation I worked with Lexi was about that concept of sort of being overwhelmed and frightened by the literature and that balance. But what I find is really interesting in the kids that I have now, like those years 7 to 9 children, especially, so that's 11 to 13, 14, they love dystopia. So it's almost like they're interested in knowing what would happen if the worst happened. How would they survive it, rather than if this is going to happen, what can I do to stop it? I think that's the thing that I've seen most of the difference between the primary and the secondary. Interestingly, when I asked the kids what was their most interesting, the favourite genres that they read, environmental fiction was the lowest. It was absolutely bottom of the pile. However, books about animals and wildlife was really high. So they don't see the two things as necessarily being the same. And I think because their pets are animals, they see that as something they can really relate to. And I think that's for me, that's the biggest sort of surprise and the interest about the differences as the children grow older. I think also they really like, at this age, finding out about themselves, things that they can do. So they're really interested in knife crime in our, in the UK, in growing up in drug issues and how those things happen. Not that they're necessarily getting involved in it, but they're interested in it because they're being told about it all the time at school. So that's what they want to find out about in their stories. And I just feel that that the environment is sort of like a little bit down on their agenda because they're too busy just growing up.
Yes, I do agree with Laura. We see a lot of that here with our primary students too. When they are young, they are introduced to, just like JoAnne said, the Great Kapok Tree or Wangari Maathai's stories. They're very interested in it. But as they grow a little older, I feel that they like the sense of empathy and connection that they can share with books which has single animal protagonist, or something like Axe, or The Lost Whale, The Last Polar Bear, has a sense of thrill and adventure, but that connect with that particular animal really helps them. And in fact, we have had an amazing Indian author who has just come up, who has captured, I feel, somewhere this missing link. His name is Rohan Chakravarti. He writes for green humor, so where he tackles species who are going endangered, or animal wildlife, and he uses a graphic novel format, as we know, which, I mean, children love to read them. And so, and then he's an amazing speaker himself, connects with children really well. And he writes primarily for slightly older children, maybe in the age range of around 10 to 13. And his books, I can see, are very, very interesting to the children. We introduce them. Rohan speaks with the children. And I feel that there are many authors also trying to bridge that gap now from, where a child is interested only in a particular animal species, and extend that bond and empathy towards large issues without overwhelming them. Like Laura says, they will reach an age where it gets overwhelming, but that sweet age where they're still not overwhelmed, there are authors trying to fill it in, and so it's hopeful.
Thank you so much for that wonderful opening salvo of green-themed discussions. And I think that's already leading on beautifully. I want to sort of circle around to anything we sort of haven't covered that are sort of big patterns. But just before we get there, I think the other sort of founding part of what we've been doing is this thing about making books, making conversations travel. So just to dig into that, do the readers that you work with, do they want books in other languages? Do they want books in other countries? How much literature in translation do you get? Are there any patterns that are sort of touching on those themes about books and conversations, traveling across borders, across cultures, across different contexts that you could share? Because one of the things I was so struck by in year one of the project was we had an author panel. I said to the authors, oh, can you let us know, your books are in lots of countries, what do you know about this? And the author became so apologetic and said, I have no answer. I only heard ever once from one person in another country about my books. And that was so surprising to me, but also, again, it was one of the things that fueled my feeling that we really need to do something in this space to get this going. So do you, maybe the answer is people aren't doing that, but it would be great to know from your very different perspectives, but obviously the common themes, what's your take on that sort of question? And maybe just for ease, we could go around in the same pattern, just so that I don't have to direct traffic, as it were, and you don't have too many interruptions from me.
Okay, so we had a discussion in Bath last year about this, and I found it really fascinating because we don't, to my knowledge, we do not get a ton of books here from other countries, and a lot of books that are big here don't make it across to other countries as well. And we were discussing why we think that is. And if you can remember, I should have looked up the name of that book, the Walnut book, but we're talking about it, that picture book that we were reading. And we had a bookseller in the circle too, and we were asking, she was saying that she wishes they had something like this in the UK. And she said she brought it to her bookseller boss, and he said it's too American because it talked about pecan pie, and so it wouldn't sell. And so there's a lot of perspective there that I think is a bit narrow. And of course, it goes with everywhere. I know it's the same over here, because of course I believe that book would be amazing over there, and we learned, we had a book from Norway that we discussed. He had one about death that really dug into things that we wouldn't normally go into detail about here. And I think that's something we need. And so there's a lot of, I can't think, like, we need to cross a lot of those boundaries, because I don't think that the book buyers are understanding how easily they would be consumed, and the holes that need to be filled. We have a lot of authors from different countries, but that live here, and so as far as diversity goes, I don't know how many books we bring in, because we have a lot of diversity here. But of the librarians I've talked to, and what I've noticed is that there is a huge increase in diversity coming in, and being bought and sold and published and consumed by the readers. And the last 2 years has been a huge uptake. And so I have a lot of hope that we can start to increase the travels of our books going to different countries. One more thing. Another thing I noticed is that I'm actually writing a historical fiction novel in verse. And my friend's novel in verse is big over here, but from what I understand, it's not big in a lot of other countries. So I think that's another thing that is it's like a taste thing, or maybe they just haven't made it big over there. So I don't know. It's fascinating, really.
To take on from Eileen, I have to say that novels in verse are very popular in our school library. And I find that especially that they work really well with children who are reluctant readers, actually, because the shorter sentences and the sort of rhythm to the language seems to really draw them in and keep them coming back for more. But going back to borders, I think in India we get a lot of books books that are published in the US or the UK that really forms the the majority of books on our shelves. And I think for me, as a librarian, I'm looking for books, like I said, in the Indian context, because they're harder to find than the ones that are coming from the West. And also the borders being just not country borders. In India, all our states are so diverse. We have a different language in every state. So in most of the schools, children will study three languages. And so most of our schools will have English books, which will form the majority of the books. We have books in Hindi, which is pretty much the language spoken across the country. And we'll have books in the state language. So not all of the Indian publishers, but quite a few, definitely picture books you can get in the local languages. Novels are a little hard in children's literature, are a little harder to come by. But the borders that I would also look at crossing with the literature that we keep in our shelves are borders on books about different religions or socioeconomic factors, or caste factors for that matter, in India. And I think all of us as educators need to be open to keeping those sort of books and not blocking them out for any reason. And it's all the more imperative, I feel, for us in India today to hold on to our diversity, which has been under threat, of late. And I think that we need to reflect that in the collections that we have in our library, so that children appreciate that diversity and want to hold on to it.
Yeah, I think that's really true about different borders. So, like, it's not just international borders, but borders even in very small communities, how different they are. One of the questions I asked recently my kids was, if you could have a perfect book, what would it be? And although there was about half of them didn't even know, they couldn't even think about what a perfect book would be. But many of the themes that were coming out were children who didn't start well but succeeded in the end, or they came from a poor background and succeeded in the end. So it's about wherever you come from, you have that ability to achieve. And I think that's really interesting in across whatever border you're trying to get over. And I think that one of the things that always comes back to me, and the thing that I try and put at the heart of all the things I do in my library, is those windows, mirrors and doors from Radine Sims Bishop, about how we need to see ourselves reflected and we need to be able to pass through to other places and get from one place to another. I think that's, for me, that's like the core of everything that I try and do in my library, whether that's about your gender identity, sexuality, race. And it's really difficult because you can't get a book for every single individual child all the time. But if you know those children better, then you can start doing that. You can start pulling in the things that you know that they're going to need. So it's difficult. But I think if we're looking specifically, as the question was about, looking at books from different places, when I asked this question, the surprising answer was that yes, we read loads of books from another country, America. So actually, loads of the things that our children read are set in the States. The other thing that really surprised me was a lot of them said, I can't remember the name, the place where the Hunger Games is set. So they don't really see those fantasy or dystopian worlds as being separate, particularly from, I don't want to make it sound like they're not clever to realise that, but they just see it as being a different place. And that's quite interesting as well if you start trying to dig down into that a little bit. But on the other side, we have a lot of kids who love reading football hero books, and that is all set in different places. I know that they're sort of narrative non-fiction, but all of these famous footballers growing up in all sorts of different countries all over the world, and there's background information about those countries as well and the things. So that's quite interesting. They're not interested in it. They're just only being given it in very specific types of books. And another thing that really a lot of the kids read is historical fiction set in other countries, particularly the Second World War, which is obviously still very important here. And those things, those themes of still being taught regularly. Still, had the 80th anniversary recently. So there's lots of really important things within that. So children, it's the Silver Sword, which is children in Poland moving across Europe, and Anne Frank in Holland. So there's a lot of those things. And a more recent one that was on the Carnegie Award last year, I Must Betray You, about the Romanian Revolution, which has been honestly one of the best books that the kids, every child who's read it has loved it. So very interested in that. Again, really dystopian though. Like, a lot of kids think it's a dystopian story, and then you go, no, that really happened. So that's interesting. And then so I think there are a lot of books set in other countries, or from other countries, or about other countries, but not necessarily coming from other countries.
I agree with JoAnne. India, that way we have so much of diversity. There's a lot for us to read here, and in fact, we tend to read books from outside India. Our children tend to read books from outside India more than they do. More than they read Indian authors. But that said, I've also noticed that it's a hit or miss in either case. Even if you bring in books about geographical diversity, gender diversity, financial diversity, economic diversity rather, anything else, it's a hit or miss. For example, that day we were reading with my children, we were all reading The Stars of the Night, also about the Czeching kinder transport. We took children during the Holocaust. It took them away from Holocaust affected countries. Then we were also reading Erika Mezza's To the Other Side. Both very difficult books. And our fifth graders did get it. Also, we were going through election year in India. So To the Other Side, struck a few conversations about immigration, refugees, and, also around what's happening with the world. But at the same time, we read another book, Roger Mello's. I'm not able to get the name. It's about a blanket that it's a child who has a dream, and it's a blanket. The name will come to me. It's a very lyrical kind of book, but they were not able to get it. They were not able to understand it. So what I realized is that even when you bring books from all around within India, outside, context placement, help, scaffolding by all of us, librarians, teachers, is the critical point here. And we are the ones who can place it for them, can help them talk about it, just like we are talking about it, get them to talk about it. When we were looking at the paperboard, which is a wordless story, but can trigger so many conversation, but it needs context placing. So I think that's more important rather than, just handing out books, because I don't know how much it hits the mark then.
Thank you all so much for these amazing insights and different threads of conversation. Sort of rounding off this part of the conversation, and then maybe moving into some of the things that Meghaa sort of mentioned earlier at the beginning. I wondered if we could just go around and talk about what are the other things that we haven't talked about, of the sort of patterns and threads that we're seeing that are all of the other ones. And maybe it's stuff about book length, or a type of book that isn't out there and is needed. What, maybe in amongst that, we can almost look at what is the publishing industry not really understanding is a need of readers that you are hearing about from the readers themselves, and that isn't maybe one of those big conversations yet. So whether it's a pattern we haven't discussed, or talking about those threads of what isn't even really part of the main conversation, but probably should be as we move forward, to think about, you can't find a book that is exactly perfect for every person, but if there are a broad range of books that are wonderful for a whole lot of people, there will be lots of books for everyone. So yes, should we sort of pry into anything and everything in that area of thought?
I'm going to have to think about that one. there are a lot of holes that I've noticed. One that I've been thinking about most recently is the way we have middle grade and then we go into young adult, and we're missing that like middle school aged, early high school like age group, because it's a big gap. And although our readers tend to read above their grade, so they read above their level, and an 8th grader or a 7th grader isn't necessarily seeing themselves in a lot of the young adult books that are coming out, because they're for older teens or younger college. And so that's a big piece I've been missing, because when it's put in a middle grade situation, they're not, that age isn't reading. It's the 5th and 6th graders that are reading those books. So with the 12-year-old age. So there's a gap there that I've noticed. That's all I can think of right now. I might have more after I hear you guys.
I think if I speak in the Indian context, I think when there's this whole need for diversity and representation, but the sensitivity to that diversity and representation somewhere I feel is lacking or not quite all there. There are books that are wonderful. We have wonderful books. When it comes to awareness and what I need to buy, I feel there's a huge lacking in our review culture. Every book is fantastic. We don't have a good review culture. So what happens is I spend some of my library budget on books I then don't want to put on the shelf, right? And I think the same will be with parents at home who are basing their reviews on mommy bloggers or influencers. They're not enough of critical reviewers. And I think I think the publishing, the writing will all get pulled up if we have a good review culture. So representation matters, but who is writing those books? What are the voices? Who are the voices writing the books? When we have books about climate fiction, nature, is it only awareness that matters, or are we? For me, a good book, especially about nature, the environment, climate change, needs to move me, right, in some way to action. What is that action that I take? I don't see enough of moving happening. Then it's not moving me. So yes, and then as I think as the adult who's taking books to children, I'm not moved enough to open those out to them or to suggest it to them. Yeah, for me, I a lot of it has to do with our review culture in India and what we can, then pull up the straps of the books that are being accepted and published and coming out to rave reviews. That I have to say, they come out to rave reviews.
Yeah, there's lots of gaps to be plugged, I think. I think one thing that I've not mentioned, and I don't know whether everybody else feels the same about the children they work with, but I feel that we've got like a 2-tier reading system where I am. So we test our children for their reading ages. We're lucky, we're in a really great school. I work in a great school, and most of my kids in my school have got reading ages at least where they need to be or above. Like the majority of them have that. And they have a very different need from the children who are working below their reading age and need to catch up. And I think that if we're not careful and we lump children together, then we're not going to do either of them the service that they need. So for those lower ability ones, I'm really pleased to see that even over the last 2 years as I've been a librarian, there are more really, really good short novels written at lower reading ability, but for teenagers. So they might be, I don't know, reading age of 7 or 8, but their interest level is 13, 14. So they're about exciting car chases and, you know, all sorts of stuff, like real life gritty stuff that the kids really want, but at an accessible level. Often on bigger typing, just as you would for younger children, but they've got great covers. Well, they used to have quite rubbish covers, and now they're kind of like the covers look more like real books, so the kids can be quite proud of reading them. So I'm really glad to see that's happening more, and also that there are really a good range of good authors who are doing that. So rather than sort of pulling people writing new books, I think the publishers are finding established authors and asking them to write things, so that they're kind of like tried and tested, and they, you know, hopefully they're quite good at representation. They've got lots of diversity amongst them, but they've already been tried and tested in their sort of normal books that they've written previously. So that's great. At the other end, I think we've got lots of kids who love a challenge. Like we've got kids who really read hard stuff. I was just looking down at some of the things that my 11, 12 and 13-year-olds are reading. It's things like 1984, To Kill a Mockingbird, The Kite Runner, The Art of War. They're really interested in reading. They're great readers. And so it's trying to find things that, for me, one thing I'm finding really difficult coming from primary background is like, I don't want to censor books, but also I don't want to be putting inappropriate books, like, you know, very adult books into the hands of an 11-year-old. You know, I think mostly kids will self-censor with books, but I don't want to be in a situation where I'm giving them things that is inappropriate. So I think that's something as well where it's really challenging for them, and interesting. And I think this is perfect. This is a quote from one of the children, if I can say that. So this is when I asked, what is your perfect book? This is a 12-year-old who said this. I'd like a gritty dystopia that makes you think about the challenges of today and tomorrow and pulls on your emotions. Because that's a 12-year-old. So we need to make sure that we're not writing down, and that we have that as a, you know, writing for children who need that support is there, but we also are really pushing those kids, but in a way where it's not like a 500-page tome. It's a short, sharp, brilliant book. I think that's what kids, length is really important. Like all kids don't like a big book they can put under their bed and close the door with. They like short things. Unfortunately, that's just the way of the world. They're so busy. They've got so much on. But I think, yeah, we need to be making sure we're plugging the gaps for both ends.
I have a list too. Starting with, I know some publishers like Barrington Stoke are already doing that, but first off the mark would be books for all kinds of readers, dyslexic-friendly books, you know, that everyone gets to read. I think that's first. In India specifically, English is not our first language, but we do not have quality books, amazing literature in other languages which are accessible to our children. They are starting to learn the languages. So, you know, while we have literature, amazing literature in the various languages in India, but not the ones which our children can read, they're just starting to learn the language. So I'm really hoping that we get good children's literature in all these million languages that we have in India. And I've also realized that when you want to discuss contemporary issues or burning issues, then we tend to pick up books from outside India because those are the books available. And sadly, we have, while there are some issues, but not all issues are covered by Indian authors. So I remember when our children wanted to understand what is the difference between dyscalculia, ADHD, dyslexia, and, you know, different across the spectrum. What are these terms? What do they mean? We had to pick up books from outside India. And though they understood what it meant, but it's not, if it was written by an Indian author, for our children it would have been just much more relatable. Similarly, just before we have our school holidays now, just before we closed, they wanted to know about what's happening in Gaza. What are they fighting about? What is happening? And these are younger children, they are around age 8, 9, and there's so much of conversation happening around them. As a librarian, I would have really liked to hand them a book saying, hey, why don't you read this? And, to introduce them. But I couldn't find anything like that yet for younger children. So I would really like many more books about contemporary issues, burning issues around the world for them. India itself, when we had these protests about the Citizenship Amendment Act, and we have authors like Parwanand who write some amazing books, but these are all for older children, maybe around 15, 16, 17. But what about the younger ones? The world's changing. They are hearing a lot about it. And I'm really happy they still come to us to ask us what it is. And I want to be able to give the answers. I want to be able to guide them, give them the books and say, hey, read, and we'll talk about it. So yes, I would like books on contemporary issues for younger children too.
Thank you so much. We're touching on so many amazing and important threads. So in a minute, I want to sort of open things up to sort of go backwards and forwards a little bit more rather than just coming around in the circle. But if we can go in reverse order for a minute, just to change things up, if that's okay. I wondered if we could just, for a moment, dwell on a question that Meghaa mentioned at the beginning, which is so interesting. What is a good book for children and or teens? What is good writing? Obviously, we've identified some of those things, but what are the other things that we haven't talked about that fall into that arena?
I know how it feels, Eileen, now. So I would think a good book for, because I work with younger children, anything that makes them think, anything that ignites their curiosity, makes them want to understand a bit more about it, ask questions, read some more, ideally, and easy, good, accessible language without oversimplifying it. Good language, but accessible. Yes, I think that some basic things of a good book.
Yeah, so I think it's such a massive combination, isn't it? You have to have the perfect story, the perfect character, perfect the language. Even the setting is really important. I think it's really difficult. One thing that I do feel though is that once kids have invested in a book or in a character, they really like more. So the series fiction is something that is really, really popular, and I think that is great. But it makes those brilliant standalone books about things like climate change so difficult to get into the children's hands, because they look at it and they think, well, I don't recognize that author, or I don't recognize the cover or the character, and so they're more reluctant to pick it up, whereas they could much more easily read the Next in the Cherub series, which is fantastic. But it's like there's only so many books one child can read in a term, and sometimes you think it would be nice if you read well, it's better that they're reading something than nothing, but it's it's difficult to encourage them to read something that's not what they're used to. So I think that's something that's important, that if you're going to write one thing, write lots of things about the same thing.
That is a question that can have a really long answer. I could give a TED talk on this, but just like Laura touched on with the Rudine Sims essay, it is important that kids can see themselves, and what a lot of good books have is they can see themselves and relate, even if it is not their culture, their country, their language, their situation. They can see similarities, like there's a book called Brother's Keeper that takes place in North Korea, and this girl and her brother are escaping to South Korea during the war, and she has a lot of conflict for her mother. And I talked to a middle schooler, and even though this girl has no background that is similar to that, she really felt seen with the scenes with the girl and her mother, and that brought a comfort. And also, books are sometimes the only, like, are the friend that the child needs. It's the escape from your bad day at school, or your hard home life. They're the friends. Sometimes even good writing, even if it's fantasy, which can have beautiful language and can be well written, you can escape and you can feel like those friends are your friends. And you think about that. I can remember books that I read when I was a middle schooler or a teen, and I still think about them for that reason. And then there are the books that pushed me, that I didn't want to read, because I thought they'd be too depressing, or it doesn't have a love story that I wanted. But because I was encouraged and or forced in school to read it, it pushed the boundaries of what I wanted to learn about. It opened my mind about what I needed to know, and about the hardships and struggles that other people go through, and they're fascinating, and it's important for kids to learn about all of these things because it makes them good humans. Reading books that have hardships and struggles from people from all over the world, that builds empathy for people. So that's my TED talk. Sorry.
Can I just jump in, JoAnne, just quickly, because it's just following on from what Eileen said, that one of the things that I really was interested in talking to the kids is some of them were saying that they don't know what I meant by a challenging book. Mm-hmm. And they said because they just find reading easy. And so obviously they're the ones that I'm going to be talking to on Monday because, if they're not being challenged by the physical act of reading, then, they need to be challenged emotionally, and they need to be challenged in sort of other ways, sort of ethical ways and philosophical ways. And that's where their next step is. And I think that's what we're saying about having different gaps. And so I just wanted to jump in on that, because I agree with you completely, Eileen, that that's something really important. Sorry, JoAnne.
No, that's fine. I think for me, for my younger readers, when they just come into the library, I really want them to love reading. And I think somewhere in this buzzword of diversity and issues and things, we just forget about books that are just fun and delight. And I think for my younger readers, I want those books that get them wanting to come into the library and wanting to pick up more books. And as they grow up, and I think with the facilitation in the library, read alouds and talking about books, I want books that will make them think and feel about themselves and about the world around them. And also, sometimes they're books that we don't think are great. So I'm going to give you a little anecdote that happened a couple of months ago with one of my about probably 11 or 12-year-old readers. And our school library, it's a small school, so the library caters to everybody right up to grade 12, right? So he was the 11 or 12-year-old, and he really doesn't like to read. And he's told me many times he'd much rather be on the football field than sitting in, library during library session. And they now grade 7s, and I sort of had started a little reading journal with them. And I said, you put down anything, it's not a review. You can put down a line, you can do a drawing, you can do anything. And so he comes to me with his reading journal and he shows it to me. And he had read a book which was Extraordinary People, and odd as in ODD. Now, I don't know through which cracks that book had come into the library. I was stood there a little aghast. And then he shows me what he had written. And he said, I was fascinated by this book and these people, but I actually felt really bad for them. I was wondering whether this book was making fun, of these people. And to me, right then, that was this breakthrough with this kid. And I thought, if he can reflect and think that this extraordinary people book is a good book, if he's made him do that. I mean, it was a book. I stood there and I'm thinking, okay, I need to get this out. I need to weed this out of this library. And the next day he picked up, so I said, oh, would you like a book on footballers? One of these, with short stories about footballers' lives. And so he took that, he read that, he wrote something. And then the third week, he comes to me with Skullduggery Pleasant, which is a series, right? And he says, did you know there are 14 more books for me to read in this series? And I was like, Extraordinary People is a good book. So I think the scale kind of, it moves, it shifts.
And really, if a book just touches one child and makes them a reader, then it's all worth it. Even as an author and how hard it is to get your book out, if just one kid can have a good experience, then it's worth it because it can change their lives.
I just want to add into, sometimes we're also guilty of looking at books like an adult. Just like JoAnne said, I would have been aghast at Extraordinary too, but we forget that these are children. When some of my non-readers will come up with Dogman and Diary of a Wimpy Kid, then I'm just like, want to move on. And then I realize, hey, no, I mean, maybe it's time to be a kid. It's time to be a fun reader, and it's a good book for them. And stop looking at it from an adult's perspective. And yeah.
This is so fascinating, and I love that. As Eileen mentioned, we're also passionate. It's so wonderful to be amongst people, and hopefully all the people out there watching, whether it's live or after the fact, children's books really can change the world, because stories shape our empathy, they shape us, they shape how we go about in the world, and the stories we tell as people, as families, as cultures and communities and countries and internationally. And if we give children stories that enable them to have their own power to shape things in ways that work for them, that is, I think, a real thing about how the world changes, all from what some people dismiss as, oh, it's just a children's book. There is no, oh, it's just a children's book. They're important. They do really important things in our lives. So I don't want to, I have a million questions. I could sit here asking questions, but all day, but it just seems to me we're here together. What questions would you like to ask each other? Because, I don't have all of the best questions. I'm sure that you have some really good questions. Does anybody have a question that you're sitting there going, I wish she'd ask about that and she's not? So I'm just going to sort of throw the floor open to anyone who maybe put up hands so I can go to people in turn if there are various questions. But I'd love to know, what do you want to know from each other? What are the other things you think should be in this conversation that aren't yet? Yeah, I'll come to Laura first, and then if anybody else wants to pick up at the end of that, just jump in then. Thank you.
I would just love to know what else is really, really popular. Like what things do you find your kids are drawn to over and over again? So as I said, for me, the things that really fly off the shelves in my all boys secondary school are the football hero books, and the series books like the Young James Bond and the Cherub series, Robert Much, those sorts of things. They absolutely love them, the dystopian novels. Is that something that's also the same around the world, or is it just us?
Absolutely, Laura. They're very much popular with our children too. Like I said, we get a lot of books from, from the UK published, US published. So all these series, Harry Potter, of course, universally. So Rick Riordan books. And things like the Maze Runner, the Young James Bond, was that the one you talked about? Yeah, even that's Artemis Fowl, all those work in India. Those are the popular ones that fly off the shelves very easily, like you don't need to sell them. But books that are also related to something that's happening, more like we talked about Palestine or things like that. They also move, but in a more sort of more select, more eclectic bunch of readers, and then they sort of self-sell, like it's peer-to-peer sort of suggestions that work really well with those kind of books.
I know for us, like I said, diversity is starting to, it's taken a while, but we're finally getting the ball rolling with that. And even in picture books, we're seeing a lot of picture books that are starting to show a lot of subjects that used to be taboo, like different family structures
Mhm.
and things like that. Realistic fiction is big right now. Fantasy, especially with dragons, like Wings of Fire, is huge. Let's see, fantasy, dragons. Um, Also graphic novels in general,
Mhm.
but they're
Graphic.
starting to take kind of classic novels and then redo them into graphic novels. And those are also flying off the shelves. Even like Magic Tree House and Babysitter's Club, those are now coming out as graphic novels. And those have been around forever. And something that's really cool is graphic novels. Actually, there's been a study that shows that they introduce more new vocabulary than a lot of new novels coming out. And they often don't get the same respect from parents and some educators as real books, but they really do give new vocabulary. And as you all know, they pull in readers that are struggling. So
Taking off from graphic novels, how do all of you deal with the demand for manga? Um Manga is huge. Unfortunately, not all manga is age appropriate for all children. My younger ones really want to read manga. I have a difficult time trying to moderate that. Even with the older ones, I'm unsure. Certain manga books, and I do not think are meant for them. But how do you face the same problem? What do you do? Do you restrict the kind of manga which comes in, or are you open to conversations after the children have read through all whatever manga they want to read? How do you deal with that?
I find that so difficult. So we go all the way through up to sort of sixth form, so age 18. Manga isn't something that I know a lot about. I thought it was when I was a bit naive, and then suddenly discovered that I needed to be a little bit more on top of it. Luckily, we've got a few people at the staff in the school who aren't involved in the library but are really interested in it. So I can often say to them, if we get donations, I can go and ask them, what is this appropriate or not, which is really useful. But it's so expensive as well, and also we probably have the same problem everywhere else about getting books back to the library. Manga especially seems to take a really long time to make its way back, and that's I tend not to worry too much, because I think if somebody's enjoying it, that's it's better than them not enjoying it. But unfortunately, if they're popular and they're not coming back to the library, then it just becomes impossible to keep replacing when you're paying £20 per book sometimes. So it's difficult, but they really do love them, and graphic novels generally are just really, really good.
I've noticed a good webtoons that have now been printed as graphic novels or like manga. Those have been really great, and I found that a lot of them they're more age appropriate, because where the platform that they are on, that they are from originally, like webtoons, has a lot of strict rules, and so those often can be safer. But yeah, the world of manga is so huge and it's very complicated, and they all have 1,000 million issues, and it's a lot to keep up with. So I see that too.
So I mean, we've been building our graphic novel collection, but we don't have manga because they're so expensive. And there's always books that I need to buy to add to the shelf. So manga is not on my sort of list of books to buy for the library at all. Have kids asked? A couple. And they do have their own collection. So I've told them, I mean, if something is donated, then we have manga, but otherwise we don't. But I do invest in the different graphic novels that are coming out as and when.
I have one more question. John, do you want to go?
No, I'm
Okay. Um, so we face this problem. The Heartstopper series. Um, i- they're very popular with our senior school students, slightly older children. But then we have had feedback, to put it mildly, from parents. With a lot of demand to remove the book from the library itself. What we did is we said we wouldn't remove it from our collection, but maybe speak with the student who's borrowing it before we give it to them. But the parents were quite vociferous in their demand that we remove Heartstopper series and books similar to that. Have you faced such difficulties? What did you do?
Book censoring is a huge thing going on in our country, and it is so fraught over here. I have dear friends that have incredible books that, for really odd reasons, have been pulled from library shelves. In the town that in a town that I live in, I haven't really seen any major censoring happen, but I do know that it has been a huge problem in our country. And because it's by school district here, it just varies, and it just depends on the community and the wild moms and their opinions. And so some counties do have to pull all of their books that are controversial, and some don't. So yes, I definitely feel you there. And what to do about it, I know that a lot of our librarians do feel kind of helpless, because if they're told they can't have it in there on a district, then they can't, and they can't, secretly give these kids the book. So it's really quite sad, because a lot of them, like we were discussing with how it's important for a child to see themselves and relate, some of these books are desperately needed.
I feel quite lucky because a lot of the issues that we are talking about, so sort of sexuality and gender identity, are things that at the moment we are actively being asked to teach on the curriculum. So if anybody complains about those sorts of things, we can say, well, actually, we talk about it in school so the children have context behind it, and it's always useful for them to have something that they can then go and look up in the library about it. Unfortunately, depending on how this next election goes, there are discussions about that changing here, about what we can and can't speak about sexuality and gender identity. Let's hope that doesn't happen. But I think we need to, I think at the moment we're in a very lucky situation that we have the backing of the curriculum to say this is on the curriculum, therefore it is fine to have it in the library. And I hope that continues.
Sneha, I'm not familiar with the Heartstopper series. Is it something that deals with gender and
Gender? Yes.
Okay. So we have
Way
other books
teenagers.
on the shelves. Yes, absolutely. So like Aristotle and Dante and things like that. Yes, we have those. They are very much in demand, and no, we haven't had any pushback on these books. We also do have some of them, the picture books and middle grade books on the shelves, and they've all been moving. Yeah, they move. Those books move.
I think that Meghaa is going to join in just a second and start feeding in questions from YouTube and for the other people watching live. So I will pass over and thank you all so much. I will be here enjoying, but that absolutely fascinating discussion, and I'm so grateful for your time and the amazing set of threads that we're being able to pull and explore.
Yes, I think it's been an absolutely sort of eye-opening, insightful conversation, and there's a bunch of questions that it has sort of raised in my mind, but also I think a lot of questions that have come in either on our direct messaging or on YouTube. Since we were talking about graphic novels, there's a question about graphic novel suggestions, recommendations from India. JoAnne and Sneha, if you'd have any quick recommendations from Sonal.
Yeah,
I think
as I was saying,
go ahead.
yeah.
Yeah.
So the one we started with when we started this discussion, Rohan Chakravarti's books, those are graphic novels dealing with the environment and animals. Amazing. Rohan Chakravarti. I would
And
seriously recommend.
I think Rajiv and CG Salamander's Maithili and the Minotaur, there are now three of them.
Yes.
Those actually work very, very well with our children. So definitely those, I think, in the Indian context, those two are very popular. I mean, Rohan's Naturalist Ruddy is just absolutely brilliant.
And the Mongoose Detective one.
Yes, that's the one. Yeah,
Yeah,
Naturalist Ruddy.
yeah.
Yeah.
There's also one more amazing graphic novel which has come out, which came out last year, rather, about called The People of the Indus,
Yes.
which looks at history. I thought that was fantastic to bring out history in the form of
It's
a graphic
brilliant.
novel. Yeah, The People of the Indus is another book I would totally recommend.
Sure. There is another question from Claire. I've asked for a clarification, but I think what she's asking is, so there's been a bunch of verse novels in the UK, such as Crossing the Line, about county lines, and Sarah Crosland's books, such as Toffee, The Way to Water, Travel. And I think she wants to ask whether any of these books sort of UK verse novels travel into the US, or is it just sort of novels in the US when it comes to verse? I think that's what she's asking. Apologies, Claire, if I haven't got your question correct, but yeah.
So I've just been involved in the Yoto Carnegie shadowing group. So it's a national award for the best children's books that are coming out each year. And I think of the 8 books that were written for children, 4 or 5 of them were written in verse, and another one was written about verse and song. So it was quite interesting how many were verse. It was a very verse heavy year. The Crossing the Line particularly was the Shadow's Choice, actually written by Tia Fisher, one of our alumna, Alexia. So that's it was great. Our kids really loved it. They loved the verse. I think the really good readers, they can read them in a night, so they get a lot of they get through them very quickly. But they're definitely very, very big in the UK.
Right. I think Eileen would also probably have something to say about it. Eileen, are there books from the UK verse novels that have sort of come to the US?
Yes, I've seen both of those. So they are, I don't recall, I can't remember if I've seen them on the shelves in like the libraries I go to, but they are, you can buy them from US stores here. And I know it's really difficult because there are a lot of books that I want from the UK that I can't get here. And so I really shopped a lot when I was there. It's so frustrating.
Sure. I have another question about, I think this is a question every author and publisher will probably have. How do you get to know about the latest books that have come out for young people in the market? What are your sort of sources? I imagine that you would be watching out for them and then it would be the children, or would you have children coming to you and say, I've heard about this book and can we have it in the library? anybody is free to sort of answer that first.
Yeah, it goes both ways. Um, uh, Students do come. See, once students have started reading, then it's not something they can stop. They are always on the lookout for books, especially during summer breaks and winter breaks, and they're very excited to come back and say, "Hey, I found this book. Do you know this?" So you get to hear about a lot of books from them. But one of our major jobs as librarians is also that we go through publishers' websites, we go through book catalogs, we also follow lists, short lists, long lists for all the awards. Um, we speak with each other, we connect with other librarians, other teachers who are interested in reading, or parents. A lot of parents are also quite involved in reading when they come across to speak, to read to the children, or just to have a chat about books. But it is a constant process of looking out. You can't find books in just one place. It's no longer that simple. You look around to see where you could find them.
Um,
There are a lot of like book fairs and conventions here, like Scholastic, and a lot of the we have a lot of things, that a lot of conventions that libraries and educators can fly to, and then each publisher has a booth, and they have books that haven't come out yet. They have ARCs that you can read and decide if you want them, to order them. Lots of free books, and so in that way it's nice because you get a chance to preview, and they are kind of hawking their wares. So you have a lot of options thrown at you to sort through. Um, Word of mouth is huge. I go through NetGalley a lot. I don't know if you know what that is. It's a site that has, yeah, that you can get digital ARCs. Um, and librarians and educators get kind of first dibs for that. And we can write reviews, which I think is really important, because then we can write the good reviews that we all want to read.
Yeah, in my library we have pupils recommend books, and then the end of each month I have my budget, and obviously there's some things I have to buy, but the budget, which I try and get some that the children have recommended each month, so that they can see their own choices being put into the library. Google's amazing for being able to what are the best books about X, and then if you sort of cross-reference that 2 or 3 times, then the same books start coming up quite a lot. We're really lucky in Bath. We have amazing local bookshops, and the knowledge of the people who work there is just phenomenal. They do a lot of the legwork for me, so I can go in and say what's good big at the moment. But yeah, there's no one source. It's constant. I mean, I love. Luckily, we all love books, don't we? So it's not a chore, but it's a job that never stops.
Yeah, I think quite the same for me. There's no single source, but definitely there are a few people that I would turn to for recommendations, or follow on social media. Of course, for for Green Reads, it's the Green Literature Festival sort of blog, and all the recommendations on that. And a few of the bookstores, like you said, that are really good for recommendations. I do get suggestions from the children. What I find a lot of the time, they like, especially with the young adults, the older children, they like the TikTok recommendations or the book talk recommendations that I need to then filter. So, yeah.
Is there sort of system you have in terms of, because there's obviously a lot of different sources that you refer to, but is there a system of sort of weeding out the ones that are probably not that great? Are there some sort of qualities you look out for in people and places that you turn to for book recommendations then? Because there seems to be no pattern in that sense. There's so many places you can get them from. So, Laura, if you could start, and then we'd go to JoAnne and Eileen and Sneha.
I think one thing that I'm really aware of is that what I might like might not be what the kids are liking. So it's really important for me not to just pick up a book and go, oh no, because that's my judgment. And sometimes kids like things that I really don't. I find graphic novels really difficult to read. Because there's just too much visual information for me, and I think a lot of children must feel the same way about a traditional novel. So I think that's why going to different sources is really important, because the more opinions you can get, the better. I think you have to be really careful not to just enforce what you think is good literature on the children that you're dealing with.
Sure. JoAnne?
So for me, I cross-check reviews a lot for the foreign books, a lot on Common Sense Media, or some of the the sort of like the Kirkus reviews and things like that. Those are the ones I check. Like I said, for Indian books, I've been struggling to find an unbiased critical reviews. So the few people that I would, you sort of develop or sort of grow the list of people that whose reviews you can trust, and then look to them for recommendations. So I think each of us needs to sort of build that sort of level of trust. I think for us, a lot of the internationally published books, there are a lot of reviews available online, right? You can sift through them, and the I think with Indian published, we still don't have sort of one site like we used to have before, Good Books or something like that. That would really help give us one place to go to.
I have a bunch of questions. So I'm going to apologize to Eileen and Sneha and ask the next question and come to you first. One of the sort of issues that is often raised, especially in the Indian context, is the fact that books aren't getting edited that well enough, or as sort of thorough as maybe they were in the past. And I know it's raised a lot here in India, but I'm wondering, Eileen and Laura, if it's also a problem in the UK. Do you think that publishers are investing enough in editing books for young people? Eileen, maybe you can go first.
As an author, as a new author, I have noticed there is a difference with the way editing is done. I feel like we have to go to our friends and our beta readers and do a lot of self-editing, and having our friends edit our things, people we trust, first, before it even goes to a professional publisher, like a professional editor. And that used to not be the case. There used to be a lot of back and forth with editors, and you had time to discuss, but now there is just no time for that. I don't know if it's budget or just the influx of how many books, or how, like, maybe we have fewer editors that can work, but it's just not there. So it seems like that you just get one or two sweeps, and I do notice there are some errors in the books that make it all the way to publishing, and it makes me so sad, because like, it just kind of kills you to see one of your books, one of your friends' books, have a really bad grammatical error or something. So that's the case over here.
Laura?
So in the books that I read, I don't see like, if I come across a typo, I'm quite like, it doesn't happen very often. It's quite shocking and quite exciting when you find something in a kid's book, especially, that's not right.
It just happens.
Yeah, obviously it happens occasionally, but I would say that the copy editing's really fantastic. I don't really know. I haven't had the process from a professional point of view, but I do know that when I was doing the MA and when I was writing more and talking to people who were in that position, it was like you needed your book to be ready. Like, it wasn't like, oh, I've got this great idea and I've written a few chapters and let's work on it together and get the best out of this book with the publisher. It was like, I have a book that is basically ready to go, and all you need to do is polish it. I know it's not that easy. I've spoken, I have many, but that's the impression, that you have to be completely ready before you can send it in, which I think is quite off-putting for a lot of people. Again, I'm talking about diversity. If you have any kind of dyslexia, or lack of education, or just lack of opportunity to have got to the point where you can write grammatically perfect sentences all the time, then we're losing those stories from people that perhaps working collaboratively would have been published.
I totally agree. I have really bad dyslexia, and I just have to work really hard and train my brain, and I just have friends that I depend on that once I run through my things, they can catch things that I just didn't spot. But it does make it a lot more stressful, and it does scare away a lot of, I'm sure it scares away a lot of fantastic writers, because some of my favorite writers are dyslexic, and where would we be without them? I don't know, because their stories have changed the world.
I remember Benjamin Stefanayo, and I heard him talk at one of the Bath Literature Festivals, and he was dyslexic, I believe, and he wrote a lot of his poetry because it was an easier way for him to get out his information, because it's shorter and there's less, the grammatical rules are not the same. And he was encouraged to write his first novel by his editor, saying that, I think you can do this. But they worked really collaboratively on that. And I think, I know that there's lots of great editors who do work very closely backwards and forwards, but I think that that's for established authors. Once you're established, that back and forward happens a lot. But until you break in, you kind of have to be. I'm saying this, and I don't know completely because I haven't been there, but I think that the feeling I got when I was doing the MA is that it needs to be really, really well structured, really well edited before you can send it off, even to your agents.
Sure. Actually, Laura, I had just one more question for you, specific to something that you had mentioned, why you said that children do look at the cover of, obviously, but also the name of the author, which is something, when I was in Bath last year, I was having a conversation with a few different publishers and agents, and they said one of the biggest barriers when it comes to literature across borders is that children wouldn't readily pick up a very sort of unfamiliar name if it's a sort of like not a traditional name or not something that sounds very so which it has yes an alien in a strange way. It's what he said was, it's such a small observation, but that is what actually keeps sometimes publishers from commissioning certain kinds of books to people of a particular
demographic. Yeah, I understand. Yes, I understand, because I think children we talk like they like to see themselves mirrored in things. If they immediately don't recognize themselves even in the title or the author's name, then it can be an initial barrier for kids who perhaps haven't had experiences of other people. So if you can't even say the author's name, that might be something that they like, oh, that's really strange and confusing. I don't know whether it's that simple, really. I think, again, it's about those adults being able to push things into the right children's hands, isn't it? And being there to support them and saying, this is a great book, rather than the children having to go down the shelves and pick something out. One of the things I've noticed that publishers sometimes do is that they have the name of the author, and then they go, a really well famous author doing some sort of promotion of that wonderful book, says somebody we really know well, also on the front cover. So that kind of draws the reader in, which is clever. And that's caught me out a few times when I thought I bought a book written by somebody and actually it was written by somebody else. But yes, I think it's true. Like if I say Anthony Horowitz, for example, everybody knows his Alex Rider series. Some of them don't know he's also written horror. And then when they go, oh, look, I know this person. So they're immediately drawn into a different genre, which is great because it then sends them a different way. But again, if you're not that famous person who's got 500 books published, then, if you've got one or two books, then it's really difficult to get noticed and be trusted.
True. And oddly, I think that doesn't quite happen in India, because our kids are very used to picking up books by people from other geographies, isn't it, JoAnne and Sneha?
Absolutely. I think even our Indian names are also different, and they definitely, all the foreign names are foreign, right? And so they just sort of, they're used to it. They pick up anything. I think that doesn't matter. But once they identify the authors, or for the younger children, they identify even the illustrators, they will go for those books again and again.
And
Yes.
it's not just the name of an author. I mean, I completely agree with JoAnne that recollection is a very important part in picking up a book, but it is also a combination of the cover page, the blurb. I think the blurb plays a very important role if they're able to connect with it, if they're able to pick up something which attracts them. And sometimes the novelty of finding an author who has a unique name they haven't heard before, because children are very curious, much more than what we give them credit for, and much more than adults. Something which, it makes them want to think like, hey, what's this? It sounds different. All of these factors. So I don't think it's as straightforward as unknown author or unknown illustrator. There are a combination of factors which go in when a child chooses a book.
And I think, Megha, that the act of encouraging them to browse, this thing of browsing, is doesn't always come to them. They'll run to the shelf for something they know and pull it out. But there's a certain amount of serendipity, right, that comes with browsing. And I find it very important to get them to browse. So whether I'm getting them to do a game or something in the library that is encouraging browsing, for me, that's as they go along, and as they may be looking for one author to kind of just fall upon another one and want to pull it off the shelf.
And I think when I first started in my library a couple of years ago, one of the first things I did was to genreify the library, which was a great thing, where we took all the books off their alphabetical shelves and put them into genres. And it made a huge difference, because then kids come in and they say, I love dystopian stories, so you can send them to the dystopian shelves, and you go, anything on there would be of interest to you. So it kind of takes down that thing about, I know, Suzanne Collins, for example, I know where to find her because she's C. Whereas now it's like anybody with a green sticker, that's dystopian. You can go and find that, which I think has been a real help to breaking down some of those barriers about names, because then they're looking more at the titles than the authors.
Interesting.
I would say, sorry.
Sorry, no, Eileen, please go ahead.
I would say, from what I've noticed, is the cover is the first thing they notice, and then just the synopsis of the story. I don't know, I haven't come across author names being a problem in the past, like when a lot of my friends and mentors were publishing like 5 to 10 years ago. A lot of them would have to initial their name, like J.K. Rowling, A.S. King, A.R. Capetta, because gender was an issue. But now it doesn't really matter. A lot of them wish that they could just bring their names back and be known as like Carrie Ann Holt instead of K.A., So that's what I've noticed.
There's a question that's coming from Lakshmi Mitter, and she wants to know, how do we get children to read the sort of books on diversity and other difficult issues which they might not sort of gravitate to automatically? Maybe like a few quick last words. And there's one more question, and then I think we are very much close to the end of this discussion. But yeah, maybe I think, Eileen, we can start with you, since and then go around the block.
Oh, could you ask the question one more time?
Lakshmi wants to know, how do you get children to read books?
Oh, yes.
Sort of themes that are not the ones that they naturally gravitate towards.
Like in a school setting or as a parent? Let's see.
I think in a school setting is what
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think you can set up a lesson that piques interest about the country or the person or the history, and do a setting so they have syntax and a backstory to fill in, because then you're intriguing them and sparking some interest before they even start. Because if they come into something that they don't know anything about and have no investment in emotionally, then it is kind of like a cold call. But if
Mm.
you can build the stakes, the emotional stakes, if you can introduce the subject or the person and give them some tidbits. And then also just the different genres, like if it's a struggling reader, maybe you can try to find some graphic novels to start with, or novels in verse.
Sure.
That's just
Sneha?
I agree with Eileen. Context setting is very important, and after that, read
context.
aloud to them. I think that's one of the greatest things ever. When you read as a parent or a teacher, you read aloud to your child or a student. Uh, the chance you are increasing the chances of your child being much more interested in the story. We have parents coming into our school regularly, and they bring in books um, across genres. You'd be surprised at the kind of books that they bring in, books that they read when they were children, or somebody came in and read Atomic Habits for Children to a bunch of grade 3 students. And I was skeptical, to tell you the truth, but it went really well. And that's the power of reading aloud. I would
Mhm.
say read aloud.
I
Sure.
agree. My mom even would read aloud to me if it in high school while I was doing other homework, if it was a book I just could not focus on, and it helped a lot because some of us are auditory learners.
Sure.
Yeah, I agree. My husband actually has started reading more since my kids grew up more, because he's then taken on. So he hadn't read Harry Potter, and he read Harry Potter with the kids, and then read the rest of the Harry Potters because he loved it so much. And so he's sort of developed his reading habits as the kids have grown older. Audiobooks are also great, but in terms of those difficult topics, perhaps difficult for some people, we have themes of the week at our school. So whether the theme is obviously it's Pride Month in here at the moment, and so in the new school newsletter, I would send home examples of some of the books we have in the library that discuss those topics. When I was again talking to the kids about where they get their books from, most of their books are got from bookshops, and they're bought by other people for them. So by telling the parents about those books, they're more likely to be bought for the kids, hopefully, when they see them in the shops. We also have in our school what's called the Beeching Canon. So we have 50 books that we recommend to children, so 10 for each year group. And I mean, it's taken a long time. It's not perfect, but we've tried to be diverse in the sort of ages and stages and types of books that those involve. So those are some of the ways that we try and encourage those wider diversity.
I noticed that they clarified that it's for like a parent point of view. And so, like what we've just built on what we've already been saying, audiobooks. If there's a movie version, I have my kids read the book first and then do the movie, and we make a big deal, have a big movie night. And themes, I do theme things, so just to put that in.
I also find, trying to pick up what is currently happening, what they're hearing on the news, what they're reading in the newspapers, what their parents are discussing at home. If you're able to pick up on those conversations when they're in the library, sometimes hold these conversations with them individually, maybe. If they've approached you, or if you've overheard a conversation that's happening, and then suggest the books that are available. But what we often do is have themes, and the theme runs across the sort of quarter. So we can really pull those books out of the shelf, and I display them. Because, like I said, it's a small library for grade 2 all the way to grade 12. I have little displays on that, pulling out all books, fiction, non-fiction, all the genres that are related to that sort of topic, to help them explore, to show them what's available, really, and just make it easier for them to pick that out of the display. And then all the read alouds are also based around that theme for that sort of quarter. So the conversations then sort of last longer, and they tend to delve a little deeper. But to begin with, to actually hold the conversations through a read aloud and discussions and response, whether it's written or through art or poetry, whatever open it out and give them that space to respond.
Another word of caution, maybe a strong word, but when you're as a parent or a teacher, when we are introducing a topic which the child, the reader, the child is not is being introduced to, has not heard of it for the first time, or you're introducing something new. Let them make a call. Maybe ask them to read the first 10 pages or something like that, and come back to you and say, what do they think about it? Do they want to read more? It's quite possible they'll come back to you and say, no, we don't want to read anymore. And as the rights of the reader, I never force them. It's the absolute worst thing you could do. They'll come back to it. Maybe they'll not. But then for sure they're not coming back to it if you force them to read it. So it's also giving them an opportunity. Maybe then you do a little more legwork and get something similar on the topic, but not exactly the similar kind of story. But not forcing them to read something which you think they should be reading is also a very important part.
Sure. Wow. I think we've run out of time, but I haven't run out of questions that have been pouring in. But I am sure there'll be another time and more opportunities to do this. Just so delighted that we were able to ask some of these questions and that you so sort of generously gave of your time and your thoughts. I am going to hand over to Lexi for any closing remarks. And thank you so much, everyone. Really, it was such an engaging conversation. I'm sure everyone watching on YouTube, there's been a bunch of questions and there's been a bunch of compliments for the panel. Really, thank you to everyone. Lexi, if you want to close off today's discussion.
I won't keep you too much longer, but Sneha, Eileen, JoAnne, Laura, thank you so much. Meghaa, it's always wonderful to work with you and the team. And just thank you to everyone who's been involved in putting this together. Thank you to all the people watching and sending in your lovely questions. Hopefully this will have a wonderful legacy because of our recording, and we will keep the conversation going and take it forward. So thank you so much for giving up your time to be part of this. Long may it last, and with luck, the first of many, many. Thank you ever so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Okay.